Social psychology in general is about the ways in which we relate to other people in our social context. Clearly, one of the most important aspects of the social context is the way that we make judgments about other people. Why did that person do that particular behavior? In social psychology, we give this type of trying to figure out the causal nature of someone else's action a name: attribution. Attribution is the judgment about the cause or behavior or other event. Most of us seem to be attributors at heart. We generally want to make some sort of attribution about a particular person or behavior. You may or may not have engaged in an attributional process when you were evaluating all the things you've listened to in the lectures so far. Why do we make the attributions that we do? We have internal and external attributions. Internal attributions are something about the person. External attributions are something outside of the person. So let's start with internal attributions. I could say something like, it's something about the actor or the person. In other words, the person who is doing the behavior in question that is causing this behavior to occur. External attribution is more something outside the person, environmental stimulus. So I could say it's something about the stimulus that caused the behavior. In other words, not the person who's behaving, but the environment or the context that they're in. Let's talk for a second about consensus. How are other people responding to the same stimulus? We often seek out consensus information. This means that we look to see how other people are reacting to the same stimulus. In other words, one of the things that you might do to figure out whether I liked a movie or not is to see how many other people like the movie. So if other people like the movie, you might assume that I also liked it too. There is one simple assumption about attribution, and the assumption is simply this, that people follow a very rational process every time they make attributions. In fact, Kelly and other researchers and theorists, like Heider, suggest this very fact to be the case. They argued that people make attributions in very much the same way that scientists arrive at theories to answers to their questions. They gather all the information available to them, weigh that information on a rational scale, and go with whichever seems to be the best choice. And in fact, it appears that there are definitely times when humans do just that, because there is a lot of evidence that supports some of the basic predictions of this theory. However, many times humans do not weigh the information at all. In fact, far from trying to investigate like scientists, we create and use some cognitive heuristics. In some way, we simply didn't want to do that much work. We can be very mentally lazy. One researcher has used the term cognitive misers to describe this phenomenon. Let's talk about some of the ways that influence our attributions in which we are far from rational scientists. Correspondence bias. Oftentimes, we're biased toward particular types of attributions for a variety of reasons. We may be motivated in some way or at the back of our unconscious forces or whatever. One of the most pervasive, although there is some debate about the universality of this, with some argument that it is more pervasive in Western cultures, has come to be known as the correspondence bias. This is also known as the fundamental attribution error. The correspondence bias has its roots in what is called the correspondent inference, the process of characterizing someone as having a personality trait that corresponds to his or her behavior. So that's a fancy way of saying something very obvious. Bias is learned culturally. Some people have argued that the correspondence bias, or the fundamental attribution error, grows out of the North American or Western emphasis on individuality, that because we focus so much on individuality, it's seemingly more natural for us to assume that individuals cause behavior, where in other cultures it's seen more as environmental. However, one study found that there were no differences in the attributional tendencies of young American and Indian children. However, among the older children and adults, the Americans tended to be more likely to make dispositional attributions, whereas the Indians tended to make more situational ones. This is a very controversial topic, and there's a lot of evidence for both the universality side and the culturally bound side.